The cooling iron closed around Maeva Sorn's hands while the fever dragon watched from its pit of red stone. No one in the Deep Ember Stable spoke as the clamps locked over her fingers. Not the flame guards, not the court healers, not the noble witnesses gathered behind the iron rail to see whether a servant woman's hands would confess before her mouth could defend them. The iron was old, black, and colder than winter burial bells. It had been forged for one purpose only, to bind those accused of stealing royal flame. If the accused carried stolen fire, the metal would drink it until their hands went numb. If they lied, the clamps would tighten. If they were innocent, the iron would stay silent. That was what the court believed. Maeva knew better. Iron made by frightened men always learned to obey the loudest hand. Iron Chancellor Prine Ashcott stood beside her with his silver beard braided in 3 strict knots, each knot capped with a little black nail of cooling metal. He held the accusation scroll as though it were a holy thing. "Maeva Sorn," he said, voice carrying cleanly through the stable. "Oath-bound servant of the Deep Ember Stable, you are accused of drawing royal flame from His Majesty's ancient dragon under false pretense of care." Maeva kept her head bowed, not because she accepted shame, because the fever dragon was looking at her. Across the stable, the ancient beast lay half submerged in a hollow of smoking black stone. It was older than the palace, older than the Voss crown, older than the laws painted in gold above the stable arches. Its scales should have burned deep crimson. Tonight they shone sickly white at the edges, as if flame had turned to fever beneath them. Its breath came rough and uneven, each exhale spilling sparks that died before touching the floor. For 9 nights, Maeva had cooled that fever with wet ash, bitter root steam, and the quiet warmth of her own palms, placed carefully beneath its crown ridge, where the heat gathered too cruelly. For 9 nights, the dragon had not burned the palace alive. On the 10th morning, the Chancellor accused her of theft. A flame guard pulled the second chain tight. Pain cut across Maeva's wrist. She did not cry out. Prine watched her face with faint disappointment. He wanted a sound, a sob, a plea, something small enough to make guilt believable. "Look at her hands," he said to the court. "No stable servant touches royal flame without mark. Yet for days she has hidden herself beside the beast, and now the dragon's crown burns lower than the king's own brazier." A murmur moved through the nobles. Maeva's fingers curled inside the clamps. They called it theft, because they had no word for tending a wound that belonged to something powerful. At the upper stair, black doors opened. Dragon King Alaric Voss entered without ceremony, and the stable changed around him. The torches bent inward. The flame guards dropped to one knee. Even the fever dragon dragged one ember-bright eye toward the man whose bloodline had ruled it for 3 centuries. Alaric wore no crown in the stable, only black armor, a dark mantle clasped with a single red stone, and a face too controlled to be kind. He was tall, broad, and built with the stillness of a blade kept sheathed, because everyone already knew it could cut. His eyes were molten amber, rimmed in shadow. Maeva had seen him only from a distance before. At feasts, at dragon rites, at the old stable gate, once, when he had stood alone after midnight, with one hand pressed to his chest, as if his own heart had burned him. Now he looked at her chained hands, then at Prine. "The iron is already on her," he said. The Chancellor bowed. "By emergency authority, Majesty. The dragon's fever worsened before dawn. I could not risk more stolen flame." Alaric's gaze sharpened. "I gave no order for clamps." "No," Prine said smoothly. "But you gave the court your word that no rank, no beauty, no service, and no pity would stand above royal stability. I acted to preserve the appearance of impartial law. There it was, the beautiful trap. If Alaric condemned the Chancellor, he looked like a king shielding a servant while his ancient dragon sickened. If he allowed the binding, he looked fair. Maeva saw the choice settle over him. So did Prine. Alaric looked at Maeva. His expression did not soften. Were you alone with the dragon last night? Maeva lifted her chin. Yes, Majesty. Her voice came rough from ash steam and sleeplessness. Did you place your hands on its crown? Yes, a noblewoman whispered. She admits it. Prine smiled. Alaric did not. His eyes moved from her face to the faint blistering around her palms, where the cooling iron had begun to frost over old heat burns. Something in his gaze flickered. Not mercy yet, but attention. Why? He asked. Maeva looked past him to the dragon. Its breath hitched. The fever dragon's crown ridge pulsed white-hot, and every chain fixed around the stone pit shuddered. The court stepped back. Maeva stepped forward. The guards seized her arms. The dragon growled, not loudly, low enough to shake dust from the vaulted ceiling. Alaric raised one hand. Release her arms. Prine turned sharply. Majesty, I said her arms. Not the iron. The guards let go. Maeva crossed the black stone slowly, cooling iron dragging at her wrists. Every step closer to the pit made the clamps smoke. Cold metal hated dragon fever. It bit deeper into her skin, trying to drink what it did not understand. The fever dragon lifted its head. Gasps broke across the court. The beast was large enough to crush the rail, large enough to burn every witness to bone if its fever broke loose. Its horns were molten gold, its crown ridge cracked with white light, and between each breath a sound of pain scraped from its throat. Maeva stopped at the edge of the pit. She did not bow to the king. She bowed to the suffering creature. Prine's voice rang behind her. There. See how eager she is to touch royal flame again. Maeva ignored him. She raised her chained hands. The cooling iron should have recoiled from the fever. It should have drunk the heat from her palms and gone black. Instead, the clamps began to glow. Not red, blue-white. The fever dragon stared at her hands. Then, before the court, before the chancellor, before the king who had allowed the test to continue for the sake of impartial law, the ancient dragon lowered its burning crown. It pressed its fevered forehead to Maeva's iron-bound hands. The stable erupted in cries. Maeva closed her eyes as heat and cold collided through her bones. Pain flashed up her arms, but beneath it came something deeper. The dragon's fever, wild and trapped, searching for the one touch that had cooled it without taking from it. Alaric took one step toward her. The dragon's eye opened and fixed on him. A warning. The king stopped. Prin's face had gone pale, but only for a breath. Then he recovered, as men like him always did, by turning wonder into danger. The beast recognizes the theft, he declared. It seeks what she stole. Maeva opened her eyes. The dragon's crown remained bowed beneath her chained hands. Then the cooling iron began to change. Letters burned across the clamps, one by one, not in flame but in frost so bright it lit every face in the Deep Ember Stable. Not thief. The court fell silent. A second line formed beneath the first. Fever keeper. Alaric stared at the words. He had expected the iron to judge her. Instead, it had judged the silence he allowed. Prine's scroll slipped slightly in his hand. The fever dragon exhaled against Maeva's bound fingers, and for the first time in 10 days, its breath did not spark. It cooled. Then the iron clamps tightened around Maeva's hands, and wrote one final warning in blue-white light. Ask who ordered the fever left untended. The first black nail in Chancellor Prine's braided beard split open with a sound like cracking ice. Blue-white frostlight clung to the stable air long after the warning vanished from the iron. Maeva stood with both hands pressed to the fever dragon's crown, the cooling clamps smoking against her skin, while every noble behind the rail stared as if the Deep Ember Stable had opened its throat and spoken treason. The dragon breathed once, slowly. No spark spilled from its mouth. For the first time in 10 days, the red stone beneath its jaw did not crack from heat. Maeva felt that small mercy passed through her bones like water through ash. The fever had not broken, not fully, It had only loosened its grip, but the creature was no longer fighting the air for every breath, and that mattered more than the court's horror. Iron Chancellor Prine Ashcott lifted one hand to his beard. The black nail at the end of the first braid had split from cap to root. A line of white frost ran through the metal, thin and bright as an accusation. He covered it with 2 fingers. Maeva saw. Alaric saw. The fever dragon saw too. Its ember eye narrowed toward the Chancellor, and the old chains bolted around the pit scraped across stone. Prine recovered before fear could make him honest. Majesty, remove her from the beast. No one moved. His voice sharpened. She has tampered with the iron. The clamps were forged to expose thieves, not write riddles for frightened servants to worship. Maeva did not answer. The dragon's heat surged under her palms again, wild and painful. She adjusted her hands, pressing the cooling iron along the crown ridge where the fever gathered brightest. The metal drank the heat. Her wrists burned with cold. The dragon groaned, but it did not pull away. Alaric took another step closer. This time the dragon did not warn him back. That seemed to wound him more than the first warning. For 3 centuries, the fever dragon had lowered its crown only to Voss kings during blood rites. Now it endured him at the edge of the pit and trusted a chained servant's hands at its brow. "What does that nail mean?" Alaric asked. Prine's eyes did not flicker. "Old iron cracks near unstable heat." The clamp wrote a warning. The clamp reacted to stolen fire. It named her Fever Keeper, and thieves often learn the language of what they steal. Maeva looked up then, not at Prine, at Alaric. "Majesty," she said, her voice low from pain. "If I stole from him, why is he cooler?" The stable went quiet again. Not empty quiet, listening quiet. Alaric's gaze held hers, and for one breath the court between them seemed to fall away. He did not look gentle. She did not need gentle. Gentle could be another way powerful people delayed truth until the wounded learned to stop asking for it. He looked as if the question had entered him, where armor could not. Prine stepped between them. Because stolen flame can be returned to hide the theft. Maeva almost laughed. It would have sounded like breaking. Instead, she bowed her head back over the dragon's crown and shifted the left clamp beneath a vein of white heat. The dragon shuddered. A deep rumble rolled through the stable stones. The court backed away. Maeva did not. For 9 nights, she had learned the shape of this pain. The fever moved in cycles. It climbed from the throat, gathered under the crown, then dropped toward the heart. If left there too long, it would turn the dragon's breath inward. The palace would not burn from attack. It would burn from suffering. Alaric saw the movement of her hands. "You know where the fever goes." "Yes." "How?" "I listened when it hurt." No one seemed to know what to do with that answer. Court healers liked jars, titles, and silver instruments. They liked illness best when it behaved, according to books written by men who never slept beside a burning beast. Maeva had learned by kneeling on stone, by losing skin to heat, by hearing the difference between rage and pain. Alaric turned toward the healers. "Did any of you mark the fever pattern?" The senior healer swallowed. The chancellor ordered distance. The beast was deemed unstable. Prine's hand tightened over the cracked nail. "I ordered caution." "You ordered the dragon left untended," Maeva said. The words left her before she could soften them. Prine's face hardened. "Careful." The fever dragon's eye opened wider. Alaric looked at the chancellor. "Did you forbid contact?" "I restricted unnecessary contact." "Answer clearly." A few nobles stiffened at the tone. Kings did not usually speak to Prine Ashcott that way. Not in public. The chancellor had steadied 3 reigns, buried 2 uprisings, and taught the court to mistake his caution for loyalty. Prine bowed just enough. "I forbade unapproved touch until proper examination." Maeva felt the dragon's fever surge again. "And no one approved the touch that helped." "That is not your place to judge." "No," Maeva said. It was my place to kneel here when all of you stayed behind the rail. The stable changed around those words, not dramatically, not with flame, with shame. Alaric looked at the iron on her hands. Unlock the clamps. The guard nearest Maeva fumbled for his key. Maeva pulled her hands closer to the dragon's crown. No. The guard froze. Prine smiled slightly. You see, Majesty? She refuses release, because the iron holds what she stole. Maeva kept her eyes on Alaric. I refuse, because if the chains come off now, they will call this mercy and bury who ordered them. Name the hand that bound me before you remove what it used. Alaric did not answer quickly. That was the first honest thing he did in the stable. The fever dragon breathed beneath her palms, its crown dimming from white-hot to deep red. The cooling iron trembled, as if torn between punishment and healing. Alaric looked from Maeva's chained hands to Prine's cracked beard nail. Then he faced the court. I allowed the binding to stand, he said. The order was carried by Chancellor Prine Ashcott under emergency authority. Let the record name both. Prine's expression thinned. The second black nail in his braided beard split. This time, everyone heard it. Maeva felt the clamps loosen by the width of a breath. Not enough to free her. Enough to prove the iron had been listening. Alaric stepped nearer to the pit and lowered his voice. May the clamps be removed now? The question shook her more than any command. Maeva looked down at the fever dragon. Its eye was half closed. Not asleep, but eased from the edge of agony. The iron still drew fever through her hands. If removed too soon, the heat might spike again. No, she said. Not yet. Prine seized on it. There, she clings to royal flame. Maeva looked at the Chancellor at last. I am not clinging to flame. I am holding down a fever you wanted loose. A hiss passed through the old chains around the dragon pit. One by one, the links nearest Prine began to frost. The cooling iron on Maeva's hands glowed brighter. Then new words formed across the left clamp, slow and merciless. The fever was fed through locked water. The senior healer staggered. The cooling cisterns. Alaric turned sharply. What of them? Before anyone could answer, the fever dragon lifted its head from Maeva's hands and exhaled toward the far wall. A hidden iron grate, sealed behind old ash barrels, burst open in a cloud of steam. Behind it, the royal cooling water ran black, and in the black water, something red pulsed like a hidden heart still feeding the fever. Steam crawled out of the hidden grate like something that had been waiting for permission to breathe. The royal cooling water should have been clear enough to reflect dragonfire. It was drawn from the deep mountain veins beneath Aurelian, blessed with bitterroot ash, and poured through the fever dragon's channels whenever its ancient blood ran too hot. Every court healer knew the rule. If the dragon burned, the water cooled. If the water blackened, something had entered the system that did not belong. Now the water ran black, and beneath its surface, red light pulsed in slow, steady beats. Maeva felt the fever dragon's crown tense beneath her chained hands. Not fear, pain remembering its source. The hidden pulse answered from behind the grate, and the dragon's breath roughened at once. Sparks crawled up its throat. The cooling iron tightened around Maeva's fingers, colder than before, as if the metal recognized a second fire in the room and did not know which wound to punish first. Alaric's voice cut through the steam. Open the cistern wall. The senior healer went pale. Majesty, if the cooling channel is fouled, opening it inside the stable could release fever vapor. Prine Ashcott stepped forward quickly. Exactly why it must remain sealed until proper instruments are brought. The servant has already destabilized the dragon. We cannot let panic make us reckless. Maeva looked at him. He had stopped covering the cracked nail in his beard. Instead, his hand rested near the third black cap, thumb pressed against it, as if to hold it whole by force. The first two had split, when truth named him. The third was waiting. The water was locked, Maeva said. Prine's gaze sharpened. You are chained for theft, not invited to interpret royal cistern law. The fever dragon growled. The old chains around its pit pulled tight, links scraping stone. Maeva slid one iron-bound hand along the crown ridge and pressed where the heat gathered behind the left horn. The dragon stilled under her touch, not healed, but willing to endure. Alaric watched the movement. He had watched kings, soldiers, rebels, and judges. Now he was watching care as if it were a language he should have learned before this night. Maeva kept her hand on the dragon. If the cistern stayed sealed while the fever worsened, then someone wanted the cooling water unreachable. Prine's mouth thinned, or someone wanted an accused servant away from sacred channels. Alaric looked at the guards. Who held the cistern keys? No one answered. That silence moved through the stable more dangerously than flame. At last, the senior healer bowed his head. The chancellor ordered all lower water keys surrendered after the fever began. For safety, Prine said. For control, Maeva answered. The words struck him. His thumb crushed down on the third nail. It cracked. Not fully, enough for frost to leak through the braid like pale smoke. The nobles behind the rail began whispering again, but softer now. Fear had changed direction. At first they had feared Maeva's hands. Now they feared the man who had known where to place iron. Alaric stepped toward the grate. The red pulse in the black water beat faster. Maeva felt the dragon's fever climb. Not you, she said. The stable went still. A king was not often told no by a woman in chains. Alaric turned slowly. Maeva did not lower her eyes. Your flame will wake it. Prine seized the opening. Hear her. She confesses knowledge of the corruption. No, Maeva said. I confess I have been close enough to feel what the rest of you named dangerous from a distance. Alaric's expression did not soften, but the anger in it shifted away from her. Then, who opens it? Maeva looked at the cooling iron around her hands. The clamps had named her Fever Keeper, not because she owned the dragon's pain, because she had learned how to hold it without feeding it. I do, she said. Alaric's jaw tightened. With the chains on? With the chains on, the chancellor almost smiled. If she touches the black water and the iron drinks stolen flame from it, the clamps may take her fingers. Maeva heard the court absorb that. She heard Alaric stop breathing for half a moment. Then she felt the fever dragon lower its crown further, pressing the hot weight of its brow into her bound hands, as if giving her the one answer that mattered. The beast could not speak in court language. It could only show where the pain trusted her. Alaric looked at her hands. Tell me what you need. Not a command. Not permission wrapped in ownership. A question. Maeva swallowed the sudden tightness in her throat. Do not let anyone close the grate behind me. His eyes moved once to Prine. No one closes it. The words settled over the guards. Maeva left the dragon's crown slowly. The beast shuddered when her hands lifted, but did not lash out. She crossed to the broken grate, cooling iron dragging at her wrists, and knelt before the black stream. The smell struck her first. Not rot, not poison, old fever. Someone had hidden living heat inside water, meant to cool. Maeva dipped the edge of the right clamp into the flow. The reaction was immediate. The black water climbed the iron-like ink running uphill. The clamp blazed blue-white. Pain bit through her fingers so sharply that her vision blurred. But she held still. The red pulse beneath the water brightened, revealing its shape for a single breath. A heart-sized ember, wrapped in black wire. Court-forged wire. Chancellor's wire. The cooling iron wrote across Maeva's right clamp. Fever seed. The senior healer made a strangled sound. That cannot be in a dragon cistern. Maeva pulled the iron from the water. Black droplets hissed on the floor. What is it? No healer answered quickly enough. Prine did. A fragment used to stabilize old fire. No, Maeva said, staring at the red pulse beneath the black water. That is not stabilizing fire, it is feeding sickness slowly enough to look natural. The fever dragon roared, not in rage, in ogon. The red seed pulsed again, and every vein of white heat along the dragon's crown flared. Maeva staggered back toward the pit, but Alaric reached her before she fell. His hand closed around her elbow, steadying, then loosened at once when she looked at him. He was learning. Too late to be innocent, not too late to matter. The cooling iron tightened again and dragged her bound hands toward the fever seed beneath the water. Maeva resisted. No, Prine's eyes gleamed. The iron seeks the stolen flame. Maeva's arms shook. The clamps pulled harder, not toward healing, but toward the fever seed. If the iron touched it fully, it would drink the corrupted heat straight through her hands. Alaric saw it. Break the clamps. No, Maeva gasped. Not while it pulls. The fever dragon lifted its head and exhaled one thin line of blue-white steam over the iron. For a breath. The pull weakened. Maeva used that breath. She turned, both chained hands outward, not toward the fever seed, but toward Prine Ashcott. The third black nail in his braided beard split open from root to tip. Inside it, red light pulsed in the same rhythm as the hidden ember beneath the water. The cooling iron wrote one new sentence across both clamps. The fever seed answers its maker. The third black nail in Prine Ashcott's beard smoked from within, not with fire, with fever. A red pulse beat inside the cracked metal cap, slow and steady, answering the hidden ember beneath the black water, as if the Deep Ember Stable had grown two hearts, and both belonged to the same crime. No noble behind the rail dared whisper now. Even fear seemed to be listening. Maeva stood with both wrists dragged forward by the cooling iron, every link trembling toward the fever seed beneath the water. The clamps wanted the corruption. They wanted to drink it, name it, punish it. And if Maeva's hands had to become the road between poison and judgment, the iron did not care. The fever dragon did. Its head lowered until one burning horn hovered beside her shoulder. A thin breath of blue-white steam curled over her chains again, easing the pull by a fraction. Maeva drew one painful breath. His nail is calling it, she said. Prine's hand closed around the cracked braid. This is stable panic dressed as testimony. Alaric's voice dropped. Remove your hand. The chancellor turned his head slowly. Majesty? From the nail. For the first time, Prine hesitated too long. That hesitation did more damage than any confession. Alaric took one step toward him. Remove it. Prine's fingers opened. The cracked black nail glowed brighter. Red light pulsed through the split, then traveled up the silver braid like a vein under skin. The hidden fever seed pulsed in answer beneath the black water. The fever dragon groaned, and white heat flashed under every scale along its crown. Maeva moved before the court could retreat. She pressed both chained hands back against the dragon's brow. Pain slammed through her wrists. The iron hated being turned away from its target. It bit cold into her bones, trying to pull her toward the grate, but Maeva held steady. The dragon's fever surged into the clamps instead of its throat. The beast breathed. Once, twice. No fire escaped. Alaric saw it. So did the court. She is holding the fever down while your iron tries to drag her into it, he said. Prine's mouth hardened. The iron seeks stolen flame. That is its sacred function. No, Maeva said through clenched teeth. It seeks what it was taught to punish. The words came out rough, but the cooling iron answered them. Frost climbed across the right clamp and formed a thin ring around the old forge mark near her wrist. Maeva had never noticed the mark before. It was small, almost hidden beneath soot and ironwork, a crown crossed by 3 black nails. The chancellor's seal. Alaric's eyes narrowed. That mark. Prine moved instantly. All cooling iron is commissioned through the chancellor's forge. That proves lawful origin, nothing more. Maeva looked down at the mark. Lawful origin, not innocence. She understood then why the clamps were so eager to punish and so slow to heal. They had not been made only to expose stolen flame. They had been made to obey the forge that shaped them. "The iron knows your hand," she said. Prine smiled without warmth. "Of course it does. I authorized it." "No." Maeva lifted her chained hands from the dragon just enough for everyone to see the frost-lit seal. "It does not know you as law. It knows you as maker." The fourth nail in Prine's beard cracked. This one did not split quietly. It snapped with a bright sound that made the flame guards flinch. Inside the broken cap, another red pulse glowed. The court recoiled from him at last. Prine's face changed, not into guilt, but into calculation stripped of silk. "Majesty, this stable has become unsafe. The dragon is unstable. The servant is bound to contaminated iron. I invoke quarantine authority." Alaric's gaze turned lethal. "Denied. You cannot deny fever quarantine. I can deny the man feeding the fever." Prine's eyes sharpened. "Careful, Majesty. If the dragon dies while you delay protocol, every rival house will say Voss blood can no longer keep ancient fire alive." There it was again. The throne held hostage by sickness. The stable held hostage by fear. Maeva felt Alaric's silence form beside her. Not weakness. Not agreement. A king measuring how many lives could burn if he chose wrong in public. She could not let that silence become law again. "Majesty," she said. He turned to her at once. That mattered. Not enough to heal what had happened, but enough to mark a difference. "The fever seed is not in the dragon," she said. "It is in the water. If you seal this stable now, the water keeps feeding him until he burns from the inside." The senior healer swallowed. "She is right. If the channels stay closed, the fever will cycle through the crown again before moonrise." Prine looked at the healer. The man went pale but did not take the words back. Alaric faced the guards. "No quarantine. No sealing. No one touches the grate without Maeva's word." A ripple moved through the court. "Maeva's word." Prine heard the shift and struck at the place he still thought weakest. "You give royal command to a chained servant?" Alaric did not look away from the chancellor. "No, I recognize the only person in this stable who has kept the dragon alive." The fever dragon's eye opened fully, deep red, clearer now. Maeva felt the beast's attention move through her hands like a question. Not for Alaric, for here. The cooling iron loosened another fraction, then tightened again toward the black water. Maeva understood the contradiction. The clamps had named her Fever Keeper, but they were still bound to Prine's forge. They were fighting themselves around her hands. She looked at Alaric. "Do not break them." His jaw tightened. "They are hurting you." "Yes, that is not an answer. It is the answer the iron will understand." The court held still. Maeva turned toward Prine. "If the clamps were made by his forge, then they can expose the path from his hand to the fever seed, but only while they remain on me." Alaric's expression darkened. "You are asking to stay bound. I am refusing to let him call removal mercy before the iron finishes speaking." Something moved in his face. Pain, anger, shame, all of it held back because none of it was hers to carry. At last he said, "What do you need?" Maeva looked at Prine's cracked beard nails. "Cut one off." Prine stepped back. "Touch me and you prove the throne has abandoned law." The fever dragon rose. Not fully. Only enough that every chain around its pit tightened and every torch in the stable bowed blue-white. Alaric did not raise his voice. "Chancellor Prine Ashcott, surrender the broken nail." "I refuse." The cooling iron answered before the king could. Maeva's clamps flew forward, dragging her one step toward Prine instead of the water. Frost shot from her chains across the floor and struck the cracked nail in his beard. The nail tore free. Prine cried out, not in pain, but fury. The black cap landed at Maeva's feet. It split open. Inside was no ornament. No cooling charm, no lawful seal, only a tiny red ember wrapped in black wire. The same wire as the fever seed. The hidden grate roared. The black water rose upward against gravity, forming a dark sheet behind Maeva and the fever dragon. In it, dozens of red pulses appeared, one after another, buried throughout the royal cooling channel like seeds planted in a garden of sickness. The cooling iron wrote across both of Maeva's clamps in blue-white frost. The fever was planted to bloom. The black water climbed the wall like a curtain raised for judgment. Behind it, red pulses throbbed in crooked rows, dozens of hidden fever seeds buried inside the royal cooling channel. They did not drift with the current. They held their places, wired into the stone veins beneath the Deep Ember Stable, planted where clean water should have carried relief into the fever dragon's burning body. The court saw the pattern, a sickness designed with patience. Maeva's chains trembled toward the black sheet, but she forced her hands down. If the cooling iron touched that water fully, it would drag the fever through her bones before it named every seed. The fever dragon lowered one wing between her and the rising stream, not to choose her, to shield what still hurt. Alaric saw it and went very still. Prine Ashcott stood with one braid hanging bare where the black nail had been torn away. The broken cap at Maeva's feet still pulsed with a tiny red ember wrapped in chancellor's wire. He did not look frightened now. He looked offended that truth had arrived before he permitted it. "Majesty," he said, voice sharp enough to cut through panic. "The stable is compromised beyond common remedy. By old fire law, any person bound to contaminated cooling iron must be removed from the royal beast and isolated until the source is contained." Maeva understood at once. Removed, isolated, buried somewhere the iron could never finish speaking. Alaric's eyes darkened. "No one removes her." A dangerous murmur stirred behind the rail. Prine heard it and smiled without warmth. "Then you choose a servant's presence over the safety of every witness here." "No," Maeva said before Alaric could answer. Both men looked at her. She kept her chained hands low, fighting the pull of the black water. "He chooses not to hide the only thing still exposing your work." The fourth cracked nail in Prine's beard leaked frost. The fever dragon breathed behind Maeva, rougher now. The hidden seeds had begun to pulse faster, as if anger itself fed them. The senior healer stepped toward the channel, then stopped. "Majesty, the seeds are tied into the old cooling veins. If they bloom together, the water will carry fever straight to the dragon's heart." "When?" Alaric asked. The healer's face drained. "If they were planted to follow the crown cycle. Moonrise." The word moved through the court like a blade. Moonrise was less than an hour away. Maeva looked at the fever dragon. The beast's crown ridge burned white again, brighter than before, the heat collecting in violent knots beneath the horn roots. She had eased the fever twice, but the hidden seeds were feeding it from below. Every mercy she gave was being stolen back by the water. Prine folded his hands. "Then we must kill the water flow before moonrise." Maeva turned on him. "If you kill the flow, the dragon burns without cooling. If we keep the flow, the seeds bloom. If you wanted him saved, you would have named them before the iron did." Prine's eyes hardened. "You speak beyond your station." Maeva's hands shook with cold and pain. "My station was beside his suffering when yours stayed clean." The fever dragon's eye opened, one ember gaze fixed on Prine. Then the beast lifted its head toward Alaric and made a sound so low the iron rail vibrated. Not a roar, a summons. Alaric approached the pit. This time the dragon did not warn him away. Maeva watched the king place one hand on the stone edge. His fingers tightened. A tremor passed through his arm before he hid it. Not fear, weakness. She saw it because she had spent 9 nights watching pain pretend to be strength. The dragon's fever was tied to him. Alaric felt her notice. For a breath, something unguarded moved between them. Prine seized it. Majesty, step back. If the beast's fever answers your blood, the court must not see. Alaric turned slowly. Must not see what? Silence fell so hard, even the black water seemed to pause. Prine bowed. Only that your safety matters. No. Alaric's voice was quiet. You have spent this entire night telling people where not to look. Maeva looked at the king's hand on the pit edge. Beneath his skin, faint red lines pulsed in the same rhythm as the dragon's crown. Not as brightly, but enough. The court began to see. The fever is touching you, Maeva said. Alaric did not deny it. Prine's expression sharpened with satisfaction. A weakening royal flame cannot stabilize an ancient dragon. That is why strict law was necessary. Maeva felt the trap open fully now. The chancellor had not only poisoned the dragon, he had waited until the sickness reflected through Alaric's blood, then accused the one person who kept the beast from dying. If the dragon burned, Alaric would appear cursed. If Maeva was blamed, Prine would look like the only man strong enough to preserve the throne. Alaric looked at Maeva. Can the seeds be cooled? No. Prine exhaled as if that settled everything. Maeva continued. They have to be starved. The senior healer blinked. Starved of what? Fear? Maeva said. Command, forced fire. Every time someone tries to dominate the fever, it feeds. The fever dragon's breath slowed under her voice. She stepped toward the black water. Alaric moved with her but did not touch. What do you need? He asked. The question came easier now. Still heavy. Still new. Maeva looked at the cooling iron. The clamps were forged to punish stolen flame. If I turn them against the seeds, they will try to take the fever through me. No. The word escaped him before he could make it royal. Maeva looked at him. Then give me another way. He had none. That hurt him visibly. Maeva softened nothing. Do not command me safe while he burns. Alaric bowed his head once, not in surrender to her, but in respect for the truth she held. Tell me the risk. My hands may not open again. The fever dragon rumbled, and every flame in the stable guttered blue. Alaric's jaw clenched. And if you do nothing? At moonrise, the seeds bloom. The dragon's fever reaches the heart. Your blood answers it. Prine gets the cursed king he planted. The fifth, black nail, in Prine's beard split. This time red steam escaped. The court recoiled. Maeva lifted both chained hands toward the black water. The cooling iron blazed so bright the whole stable became blue-white. The fever dragon lowered its crown beside her again, offering its heat carefully, not forcing, not taking. Maeva pressed one clamp to the black stream. Pain opened. The nearest fever seed shriveled instantly, its red pulse dimming as the iron drank the false heat. Then the water screamed. Every hidden seed woke at once. Across the black sheet, red light rearranged itself into a sentence. Not made to kill the dragon. Prine's smile returned. Maeva's blood went cold. The next line burned through the water. Made to make the king kill it. The black water dropped back into the channel, but its message stayed in the stable air. Maeva felt it in the fever dragon's body before anyone named it. The beast's crown did not simply burn hotter. Its heat turned inward, folding toward the heart in a cruel rhythm. Not death by sickness, death by command. Alaric stepped closer to the pit. The red lines beneath his skin brightened. Maeva saw his right hand move toward the sword at his side. Majesty, she said. He stopped, only barely. His fingers had already touched the hilt. Prine Ashcott's voice came smooth from behind the rail. Old fire law is clear. If an ancient dragon's fever threatens the palace, the king must sever the bond before the beast turns. The fever dragon's eye opened. It looked at Alaric, not in threat, in terrible recognition. The fever seeds pulsed again beneath the black water. The red light climbed through the stable stones and reached for the king's boots like roots seeking blood. Alaric's jaw tightened. His sword hand closed harder. Maeva understood then. The seeds had not been planted to kill the dragon directly. They had been planted to make the dragon's pain echo through royal blood until the king believed his own hand was mercy. She moved between Alaric and the pit. The court gasped. Alaric's eyes flashed amber. "Maeva, move." No. The word was small. It held. His breath came unevenly. "If the fever breaks, it wants you afraid enough to obey it." Prine's mouth curved. "A servant now instructs a dragon king against fire law?" Maeva did not turn. "No. A healer is telling a man not to mistake panic for mercy." Alaric flinched as if the words had struck somewhere beneath armor. The fever dragon trembled behind her. One horn scraped the stone. White heat gathered under its crown ridge again. Too bright. Too fast. Maeva lifted her chained hands. The cooling iron pulled toward the black water, but she forced both clamps against Alaric's sword hand instead. Cold flashed through the stable. Alaric went rigid. Blue-white frost climbed over his gauntlet, then sank through it. The red lines beneath his skin dimmed for one breath. His fingers opened from the sword hilt. The fever dragon exhaled. Maeva nearly collapsed from the backlash. The iron had pulled fever out of the king's blood and through her wrists. Pain cut up both arms, deep and clean, like winter being hammered into bone. Alaric caught her elbow. This time, she did not pull away at once. Not because she forgave him, because she needed balance. He understood the difference. His grip stayed light, waiting for her to choose whether to stand alone. Prine's eyes hardened. She has touched royal blood with contaminated iron. That alone is treason. Alaric looked at him. "You planted the fever. I planted nothing." The fifth black nail in Prine's beard hissed. Maeva looked at it, then at the channel. The pulses matched. Not just in rhythm, in order. Each nail had cracked when the iron named a deeper truth. "There are more seeds," she said. The senior healer whispered, "How many?" Maeva counted the remaining black nails woven into Prine's beard. "Toe unbroken. Enough for one more law," she said. Prine's face changed. Alaric saw it. "What law?" Prine lifted his chin. "The king knows it." Alaric's expression went cold. Maeva looked at him. His silence answered, before his mouth did. "Mercy severance," he said. "If a bonded ancient dragon threatens the royal line, the king may kill it before the fever spreads to blood heirs." The fever dragon lowered its head. The court fell into horrified quiet. Maeva felt anger rise, sharp enough to steady her. So the fever makes him reach for the sword. The law blesses the killing, then the court calls it duty, and the throne survives, Prine said. "No," Maeva answered. "You survive beside a king everyone believes is cursed." For the first time, Prine's smile vanished. The cooling iron flared. Letters formed across Maeva's left clamp. The mercy law was prepared before the fever. Alaric turned slowly toward Prine. "Before?" he asked. Prine's hand dropped to the sixth nail. Too late. It split open with a crack that echoed through the stable. Inside the black cap, a roll of ash-thin metal unfurled, sealed with chancellor's wire. The fever dragon's breath struck it, and hidden writing appeared in red. A royal mercy warrant, dated 7 days before the dragon's first fever. Alaric read it once, then again. Maeva watched the last remnants of doubt leave his face. Prine stepped back. "Majesty, every chancellor prepares emergency warrants, not before illness exists. The threat was foreseeable. You made it foreseeable." The cooling iron tightened around Maeva's hands one final time and dragged both clamps toward the warrant. She let it. The frost touched the ash metal. New words burned across the warrant, blue-white and merciless. Ordered by Iron Chancellor Prine Ashcott. Then a second line appeared beneath it. Authorized for the king's hand to kill the dragon at moonrise. The mercy warrant shook in the air as if it still expected obedience. Blue-white frost crawled over its ash-thin surface, locking Prine Ashcott's name into the metal where no court scribe could scrape it clean. The nobles behind the rail stared at the words. Some looked horrified. Some looked relieved. There were always people who preferred a named villain to a shared silence. Prine did not deny the warrant. That was what made Alaric's face harden. Instead, the chancellor straightened his spine and said, "The warrant is lawful." The Deep Ember Stable seemed to draw in one breath. Maeva kept her chained hands low, but the cooling iron trembled toward the black water again. Beneath the channel, the fever seeds pulsed faster, sensing moonrise through stone. Alaric's voice went cold. "You prepared an execution before the dragon showed fever. I prepared for a risk your bloodline refused to admit. The risk you planted." Prine's mouth thinned. "A king may hate the messenger. The law remains. If the fever dragon threatens royal blood at moonrise, your hand must sever the bond." The sword at Alaric's side gave a faint red flash. Maeva saw it. So did Prine. The warrant was not merely permission. It was a hook, a law written around royal blood, waiting for fever to pull it tight. Alaric's hand curled into a fist away from the sword. "I revoke the warrant." Prine smiled. "Not broadly, just enough. You cannot revoke mercy law. Once ancient fever has entered the king's veins, only proof of healing can stay the blade." The fever dragon groaned behind Maeva. Its crown ridge burned white again, and the red lines under Alaric's skin answered. The connection between king and beast tightened in the air, visible now, shamefully public. Every pulse of the dragon's pain tugged at Alaric's sword hand. Maeva stepped closer to him. Not between him and the dragon this time, beside the hand that wanted to kill. "Do not fight the sword with strength," she said. His jaw clenched. "What else is there?" "Refusal." His eyes cut to hers. For one moment, he looked less like a dragon king and more like a man being ordered by every dead law before him. Prine's voice sharpened. "If he refuses and the dragon burns the palace, that blood is on you." Maeva turned toward him. "No, it is on the man who made sickness look like duty." The cooling iron flashed. The sixth cracked nail in Prine's beard smoked red, but did not split. Not yet. It waited for a deeper truth. The senior healer stepped forward with a shaking breath. "Majesty, if the law requires proof of healing, then the fever keeper must be allowed to attempt cooling before moonrise." Prine rounded on him. "She is not licensed. She is named by the iron. Forged iron can be deceived." Maeva lifted her hands. The clamps were blue-white, black at the edges where pain had burned through frost. "Then let your law test me where everyone can see." Alaric's expression darkened. "Maeva." She looked at him before he could command. He stopped himself. That mattered more than an apology in that moment. "What are you asking?" he said. "One cooling cycle," she answered. "No hidden cistern, no locked grate, no healer behind the rail. I cool the crown before moonrise. If the fever falls, the warrant dies. And if it does not," Prine answered before she could, "then the king kills the beast, and the servant is taken for flame theft." The fever dragon's eye opened. Not angry, tired. Maeva felt that weariness more sharply than the iron around her hands. The creature had carried the kingdom's old fire for centuries. Now men who called themselves loyal had turned its pain into a political blade. She stepped to the dragon's crown. Alaric moved beside her, close enough to catch her if she fell, not close enough to own the act. Prine saw the difference and hated it. Maeva placed the first clamp against the crown ridge. The dragon shuddered. The second clamp followed. Cold and fever collided so violently that the stable torches went blue. Maeva's knees struck stone, but she did not pull away. The fever tried to surge through the iron toward her hands. She shifted, guiding it into the clamp's outer bands instead of her bones. The old metal screamed. "Not allowed." In frost, Alaric knelt beside her. "Tell me, Maeva's breath broke. The fever is not only in the water. Prine's eyes narrowed. Maeva pressed harder against the dragon's crown. Beneath the burning ridge, something moved like a buried memory. It remembers the first seed. The fever dragon opened both eyes. The stable vanished. Not fully. The witnesses remained in shadow, but a fire memory spread across the pit. Black water. Empty stable. No court. No healers. Only Chancellor Prine beneath a hood, standing beside the royal cooling channel before dawn. In his hand was a red ember wrapped in black wire, the first fever seed. Prine whispered to someone hidden beyond the memory's edge, "When the king kills what he cannot heal, the court will ask, who should hold the crown next?" Maeva's breath caught. Alaric went still beside her. The memory turned, revealing the figure Prine had spoken to, a royal guard wearing Alaric's own crest. Then the cooling iron tightened around Maeva's hands and wrote across both clamps in merciless frost. The first seed was planted under the king's seal. The fire memory shattered into smoke before anyone could deny what it had shown. A royal guard. A hidden fever seed. The king's own seal. The court did not look at Prine first. It looked at Alaric. That was the cruelest part of the Chancellor's design. He had not needed to prove the Dragon King guilty. He had only needed to leave enough of the king's mark on the crime that doubt would do the rest. Alaric rose slowly from beside Maeva. The red lines beneath his skin still pulsed with the fever dragon's pain, but his face had gone calm in a way that made the guards stiffen. Prine lowered his head with perfect sorrow. "Majesty, I feared this might surface." Maeva's hands tightened inside the cooling iron. There it was, the next lie arriving dressed as grief. Prine turned to the court. "If a seed was planted under royal seal, then either the king gave an order he cannot remember, or his blood has been compromised by the fever longer than we knew." A murmur spread behind the rail. Alaric said nothing. Maeva looked at him. "Did you order it?" "No." The answer came without force, without theatre. It sounded like stone. Prine sighed. "Then we must consider the possibility that the fever dragon's sickness entered royal judgment before any of us understood the danger." Maeva heard the trap close. If Alaric denied the seal, he looked cursed. If he accepted it, he looked guilty. Either way, Prine could stand before the court as the only lawful man left. The fever dragon growled weakly. Maeva turned back to its crown. The cooling cycle had not finished. The memory had cost the dragon strength, and the fever seeds under the water were beginning to pulse toward moonrise again. She pressed the clamps to the crown ridge. Blue-white frost spread over the white heat. The dragon breathed through pain. So did she. "Maeva," Alaric said quietly, "can the iron test a seal?" Prine's head snapped toward him. Maeva understood before the court did. "Yes." Alaric removed the signet from his hand. Gasps rose. A Dragon King's seal was not jewelry. It was command made metal. With it, armies moved, prisons opened, marriage lines bound, death warrants became law. He held it out to her. Prine stepped forward. "Majesty, do not place royal authority into contaminated hands." Alaric did not look at him. "Those hands have done less harm with iron than yours have done with law." The words struck clean. Maeva did not reach for the ring. Not at first. She looked at Alaric. "If I test this and the fever answers, the court may turn on you." "It already has," he said. "Test it where everyone can see." The difference mattered. He was not asking her to carry his innocence. He was offering evidence to be judged. Maeva took the signet between both clamps. The cooling iron flared. Pain bit into her wrists as frost crawled over the royal seal. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the ring lit from within. Not red, not blue, but clear gold, clean flame. The fever dragon opened one eye. The gold light traveled from the ring into the iron, then toward the black water. The first fever seed under the channel answered with a pulse, but the pulse did not match the ring. It matched Prine's cracked beard nails. Maeva lifted her bound hands higher. "The seal was used," she said, "but not by his command." Prine's face hardened. "A servant cannot interpret royal metal." "No," Alaric said, "but the iron can." The signet flashed again. A second memory unfolded across the black water. This one showed no dragon, no stable, no king giving orders. It showed Alaric kneeling alone beside the fever dragon's pit 7 nights ago, one bare hand pressed to the beast's burning crown, his face tight with pain he had hidden from the court. The signet lay on the stone beside him, removed so the royal metal would not heat against the dragon's fever. Behind him, Chancellor Prine stepped from shadow, silent, careful. He did not touch the king. He touched the seal. The memory showed him pressing soft black wax over the signet face, taking its shape while Alaric bent over the suffering dragon and never saw. Maeva's throat tightened. The first thing Alaric had hidden was not cruelty. It was care. The memory faded. The court stood frozen. Prine spoke too quickly. "A wax impression proves nothing. Emergency officers copy royal marks for..." The 7th nail in his beard split open. No one needed to accuse him. The cooling iron did. Frost leapt from Maeva's clamps to the cracked nail and dragged out a thin strip of black wax hidden beneath the metal cap. The wax bore the royal seal reversed and perfect. The fever dragon lifted its head. For the first time that night, it looked at Alaric without fever-clouded confusion. Recognition passed between king and beast. Then the iron wrote across Maeva's clamps. The king's seal was stolen while he tried to cool the dragon. Alaric closed his eyes once, not in relief, in guilt. He had cared in secret and ruled in silence. Prine had used both. Maeva lowered the signet back toward him. Alaric did not take it. "Keep it until the fever is ended," he said. The court gasped again. Maeva stared at him. He looked at her iron-bound hands. "Not as burden, as witness." Before she could answer, the black water surged upward. The fever seeds had begun to bloom. Red light burst through the channel, racing toward the dragon's heart veins under the stable floor. Maeva turned back to the pit, too late to cool one seed at a time. The fever dragon's crown flared white. Alaric's blood answered red, and the sword at his side drew itself halfway from its sheath. Moonrise struck the Deep Ember Stable without showing its face. The old stones felt it first. A red shimmer passed through the floor channels, then through the black water, then into every hidden fever seed planted beneath the dragon pit. The seeds opened like small, cruel flowers. The fever dragon arched in pain. Alaric staggered. His sword slid farther from its sheath, not by his choice. Maeva saw his hand fight the command. The muscles in his arm locked, his jaw clenched until bloodless tension sharpened every line of his face. The mercy warrant, the fever seeds, the stolen seal, and the old law had all been made to meet here. Moonrise, public witnesses, a suffering dragon, and a king forced to become executioner. Prine Ashcott watched with cold satisfaction. "Majesty," he said, "the law has begun." Alaric's fingers closed around the sword. Maeva stepped into the blade's path. The court cried out. Alaric's eyes flared. "Move." The word sounded torn from him, not commanded. Maeva lifted both chained hands and caught the flat of the half-drawn sword between the cooling clamps. Blue-white frost exploded over the blade. Pain shot through her wrists, but the sword stopped. Alaric froze. So did the law pulling through him. Maeva held the blade with iron-bound hands and looked at Prine. "You made a king's mercy into a murder." The cooling iron blazed. The fever seeds beneath the water pulsed harder, trying to drag the blade forward through Alaric's blood. Maeva pressed the clamps tighter around the sword, forcing the iron to drink the command before it reached his hand. Her knees nearly buckled. Alaric released the hilt. The sword should have fallen, It did not. The cooling iron held it suspended between them, frost crawling from blade to clamp to chain. Prine's voice sharpened. She has seized the royal sword. Arrest her. No guard moved. The fever dragon lifted its head, eyes burning through pain, and one low breath rolled across the floor. Not fire. Warning. Maeva turned the frozen sword toward the chancellor. Touch it. Prine stared at her. Absurd. You forged the iron. You planted the seeds. You wrote the law to pull this blade. Touch what you made. Prine looked to Alaric, expecting rank to save him. Alaric's face was pale from resisting the fever, but his voice was steady. Chancellor, Prine Ashcott, place your hand on the sword. Prine smiled thinly. If I refuse, then every witness here will know you trust neither your law nor your innocence. That struck harder than threat. Prine stepped forward. For the first time, the court saw sweat along his temple. He laid 2 fingers on the frozen blade. Nothing happened. For one breath, triumph returned to his eyes. Then Maeva shifted the cooling clamps. The iron touched his skin. Prine screamed, not because it burned hot, because it burned cold. Blue-white frost climbed over his fingers, but it did not bite through flesh like ordinary punishment. It pulled hidden heat from beneath his skin, drawing out red threads wrapped in black wire, the same wire as the fever seeds, the same pulse as the nails in his beard. The remaining black nails split open all at once. Tiny red embers fell from them and struck the floor, each one shriveling under the cooling iron's light. The court recoiled. Maeva did not let go. The iron wrote across the sword. The hand that forged the lie fed the fever. Prine tried to pull away. The sword held him. Alaric stepped beside Maeva, not in front of her. Name the order. Prine's teeth clenched. Alaric's voice darkened. Name it, or the iron will. Prine looked at the court he had ruled through fear for years. He looked at the nobles, the healers, the flame guards, the witnesses who had once trusted his cold certainty more than a servant's wounded hands. His control cracked before his voice did. I ordered the clamps, he said. The cooling iron flared brighter. And the fever seeds? Maeva asked. Prine's eyes burned with hatred. I planted them. A gasp rose behind the rail. Why? Alaric asked. Prine's mouth twisted. Because a king whose dragon must be nursed by a servant woman is already half unmade. I only made the court see what weakness looks like. The fever dragon roared. This time the sound did not break with fever. It shook the stable clean. Maeva turned the sword downward and drove its frost-covered tip into the black water channel. The cooling iron, the royal blade, and Alaric's clean signet on her chains met in one blue-white flash. The fever seeds screamed through the water. One by one, red pulses went dark. Not all at once, not easily. Maeva felt each seed fight through her hands. Her fingers went numb. Her wrists bled beneath the iron. But the frost did not enter her bones this time. The royal signet held the path open, and the fever dragon added its breath, cooling its own sickness without being forced to die for it. The black water cleared. The final fever seed shriveled beneath the grate. The sword fell from Alaric's hand to the stone. Silent, free. Prine collapsed to his knees, both hands white with cooling burns that shaped themselves into the chancellor's forge seal. Public, undeniable. The iron had not burned Maeva's hands for healing. It had burned the hands that made care look like theft. Alaric took the key from the nearest guard and came to Maeva. He stopped before touching the clamps. Maeva, he said, voice rough. May I unlock them? The whole court heard the question. Maeva looked at the fever dragon, its great head lowered again, not in fever now, but exhaustion. She held out her chained hands. Yes, she said. But my first touch is not for you. The key entered the cooling iron. The clamps opened. Maeva's hands came free, shaking, wounded, and finally her own. She turned from the king and placed both bare palms on the fever dragon's crown. The beast lowered its burning head until its crown rested beneath her touch. The fever dragon's breath cooled under Maeva's bare palms. Not fully, not magically. It eased the way a wounded creature eases when the knife is finally removed, and the hand that remains does not demand gratitude. Its crown still burned deep red beneath her fingers, but the white fever had retreated from the horn roots. The old beast closed one ember eye, then the other, and the Deep Ember Stable fell into a silence no law could command. Maeva's hands shook. Without the cooling iron, pain arrived honestly. No metal to hide it, no frost to numb it. Her palms were blistered, her wrists cut, her fingers stiff from holding fever, sword, and judgment all in one night. Alaric stood behind her, close enough to catch her if she fell. He did not touch her. That was the first repair. The second was harder. He turned toward the court. "I bound the wrong hands," he said. No one moved behind the iron rail. Prine Ashcott remained on his knees, both hands marked by white cooling burns in the shape of his own forged seal. The black nails in his beard lay shattered around him like dead seeds. Without them, he looked smaller, not harmless, only stripped of the cold authority he had worn as virtue. Alaric looked at the flame guards. "Remove Chancellor Prine Ashcott from royal office. Not from this stable yet. He will hear the sentence where he planted the fever." "How?" "One. How?" Two guards seized Prine's arms. He laughed once, dry and bitter. "You think mercy will save your reign. The court saw your hand go to the sword. They saw your dragon nearly turn. They saw a servant woman keep what a king could not." Alaric did not flinch. "Yes," he said. "Let that be written." The words struck the stable harder than denial would have. Maeva looked back at him. He met her gaze, and for once there was no royal armor in his expression, only shame held upright. "The record begins with my failure," he said, "not hers." The senior healer bowed his head. One by one the flame guards did the same. The fever dragon opened one eye and breathed across the stone. Blue-white steam curled toward the broken cooling iron lying on the floor. The clamps trembled, then folded inward on themselves, no longer black, no longer hungry to punish. Frost wrote one final line across them. "Care is not theft." Maeva's throat tightened. For 10 days she had known that. Now the law knew it too. Alaric stepped down from the pit edge and faced the witnesses. "From this night forward, no healing touch in the Deep Ember Stable may be chained without root fire review. No chancellor, healer, guard, or king may call care theft to protect pride. Every stable servant dismissed under Prine's fever orders will be found, restored, and paid from the crown treasury." Prine's face twisted. "You weaken the throne in front of them." "No," Alaric said. "I stop letting fear write its laws." The fever dragon lifted its head then. Slowly, the chains around the pit loosened one by one, not breaking, not falling, simply releasing tension they had held for too many years. The old beast lowered its crown again, not only to Maeva this time, but before the court itself. A royal dragon did not bow to rank. It bowed to truth recognized late. Maeva drew back her hands. The dragon let her. That mattered. It was not dependence. It was consent. Alaric saw the movement and understood enough not to turn it into ceremony. He took the broken clamps from the floor and carried them to Maeva, holding them out on both palms. "These were placed on you in my court," he said. "They should leave by your choice." Maeva looked at the iron, then at Prine. "Let him keep one link," she said. A murmur moved through the witnesses. Alaric waited. "Not as honor," Maeva continued. "As sentence. He will wear what he used on others. Every time he speaks law, the iron will cool if he lies." The broken clamps flashed. "Prine, Ventpala." Alaric turned to the guards. "Done." The cooling iron uncoiled one thin link and closed around Prine's wrist. He tried to pull away. The link tightened with a soft sound like winter locking a door. Maeva did not smile. Punishment did not heal the dragon. Repair might. She turned back to the ancient beast. The cisterns need clearing before dawn. The fever will return if the black water stays in the lower veins. The senior healer stepped forward. Fever Keeper. Tell us what to do. Fever Keeper. This time, the title did not come from iron. It came from a man who had watched her work and finally understood that knowledge earned beside pain was still knowledge. Maeva looked at the healers, then at the servants beyond the rail who had carried ash, water, bitter root, and silence for years. Open the lower channels. Bring clear mountain water. No royal flame near the first flow. No commands shouted over the dragon's breathing. Listen before you touch. The servants moved first, then the healers, then the guards. The court rearranged itself around her instructions, awkwardly at first, then with growing urgency. Buckets passed, grates opened, black water drained into sealed basins where the last fever traces hissed and died under clean ash. Alaric remained beside the pit, not giving orders Maeva had already given. When the first clear water ran beneath the dragon's stone hollow, the fever dragon exhaled a long plume of deep red steam. Not white, not fever. Heat. Living heat. The stable torches burned gold again. Maeva swayed. Alaric took one step, then stopped. May I? She looked at him for a long moment. He had failed her publicly. He had also named it publicly. That did not make trust whole. It made a beginning possible. You may help me stand, she said. Nothing more. Alaric bowed his head. Nothing more. He offered his arm. She took it because she chose to, not because she needed a king, because even strong hands deserved rest after holding back a fever meant to kill a kingdom. At the edge of the pit, the fever dragon lowered its crown one final time between them. Its ember eye rested on Maeva, then on Alaric, as if measuring whether the old bond could survive truth. Alaric looked at Maeva. What must I do now? She looked toward the open cisterns, the servants carrying clean water, the broken iron, the exposed chancellor, and the ancient dragon breathing easier beneath the stable arches. Keep asking that, she said. The faintest breath of warmth touched her scarred palms. The fever dragon slept, and for the first time in years, the Deep Ember Stable did not smell of punishment. It smelled of rain on cooling stone.